everyone, and welcome back to the Tees Valley line in TSW2. This route includes, I think, about 27 miles of track from Darlington to Saltburn, but for the sake of your sanity and patience, I'll only be going as far as Middlesbrough today. This, of course, is the Class 101, a diesel multiple unit that actually had a very long service life. I think these things first entered service in 1955, and the last of them wasn't withdrawn until 2003. Of course, this route is set in 1989. Just trying to get this thing set up, of course. That's the other thing. The 101 is a diesel mechanical multiple unit with manual transmission, so it always makes for an interesting experience when you're driving this thing. Just realised I need to run to the cab at the other end and put the tail lights on. At least there's what appears to be a decent amount of time to set this thing up. Marker lights on red. Although good luck trying to see those from a distance. It's like growling. It's either just the noise of the DMU or around the other side of this wall there's a... Yep, around the other side of that wall there's a freight train. Let's go and have a look. At the expense of running late. Oh hello, some Class 37s. And there's another 101, presumably on another local from Middlesbrough. So I remember on this route at least they have the 2-car Class 101s doing the shuttle just between Darlington and Middlesbrough, and it's only the 3-car units that come in off of Bishop Auckland and do the run all the way to Saltburn. Right, obviously we need to get back to our train pretty quickly. Mind you, I don't think I've ever really been able to run exactly on time when I've driven the Class 101. The only time I can think of where I have done that is where I did a short run from Huddersfield to Marsden on Northern Transpennine. Somehow with that one I got stopped in exactly the right place at every station, and I was on time at every station in all. Just trying to crank the destination round so that it says Middlesbrough. In timetable mode in the game it said that this was an all-stop service, but it actually isn't, because we're skipping Teesside Airport, which might not surprise anyone because that station, even in the 80s I guess, must have had pretty poor service. If I remember I'll explain more as we go along. Right, gear selected. Oh, that's right. Right, first, and we're going, what a brilliant way to start, isn't it? Good job I didn't derail the ruddy thing. Feel free to laugh at that all you want, of course. Dare say if I don't even know where I was going with that, sorry. Right, it looked as though we just nudged the buffers. Good job this isn't a terminus station, otherwise that's a point. If you come into a terminus station too fast, you end up risking doing what Gordon once did at Kirk Ronan, and then obviously Real Xbox Nerd used that clip as a recurring joke in his Thomas parodies or YTPs. Alright, of course, as we depart Darlington, we can see the 37s over there on, I guess, the avoiding lines for the East Coast Main Line. What I found was a bit interesting about Darlington Station is that it's off to the side from like the main ECML itself. And I found this the other week when I was driving in Train Simulator, like the Lumo Class 803 from Newcastle down to Darlington. Because the particular service I'd chosen then had an unscheduled and unadvertised stop at Darlington, presumably to allow a Liverpool-bound Transpennine Express Class 802, presumably to allow a Liverpool-bound Class 802 to get to get a decent amount of space in front. That's the other thing with these 101s, is that I've driven them enough times to know what speeds you have to get to when you need to change gears. So when you're in first gear, you can get up to 15 miles an hour. Then I think second gear will take you up to 26 or 27. Third gear will take up to will get you up to 40 miles an hour. Anything past 40 and for coasting, you should have it in gear or in fourth gear. And of course, I'm not entirely sure when the East Coast Main Line was electrified, but I think it must have been in the early 90s, because the Tees Valley Line route in TSW was set in 1989, and as we just saw, it depicts how Darlington Station looked before, or when it was still diesels only. And that's the other thing, is that while this Tees Valley route does focus more on freight, I do generally prefer to drive passenger services on this route, and that's, I guess, why they included the Class 101. Although I think there's basically no difference between this version and what you get with Northern Trans-Pennine, except that you do get the 3-car version of this route, but with NTP you only get the 2-car. Which is a little curious. One train I wouldn't mind seeing Dovetail try to make for this route is the Class 142 Pacer, because I think they entered service about 1985, and I'm pretty sure they did run around this part of England, or just the northeast in general. And I guess even they still did until, like, what was it, 2020, when Northern finally got rid of the last of their Pacers. Kind of think that any Pacer, I reckon, would be welcome in TSW, although I can't imagine the acceleration would be all that good. Now I know that it's a bad idea to leap out of your seat while the train is moving, but I was trying to figure out how to get the AWS working. Right, there we go. Yeah, I knew how to get it working. It was just a matter of finding the right lever. The other thing I've just remembered is that Northern Trans-Pennine, that route is set in 1983 and does not have any AWS magnets at all, whereas obviously Tees Valley Line does. And I remember that the original NTP version of the Class 101, even that came with working AWS, I mean on the train itself, but that aspect of it was useless on that particular route. Right. I just realised I should be going a little bit faster. So yeah, this service to Middlesbrough we'll be calling at Dinsdale. Yeah, Dinsdale, Allens West, Eaglescliffe, Thornaby and Middlesbrough. This would have been, let's say, Northeastern Railway territory before 1923. One thing I know about the northeast of England is that back in the steam era, at least, it was absolutely rife with coal trains. I think the Northeastern Railway had steam locomotives like the T2 Class 080, which later became Q6 under the LNER, and those were the sorts of engines that they would have used on those coal trains. Certainly wouldn't, I can't imagine they would have ever used those things on passenger duties, since they were 080s and I guess unsuitable for passenger work. With the 101, I've found that you really do need to carefully monitor your speed when you're coming into a station, because I've found that it's, at least when I'm driving, I find it too easy to overshoot the stopping point. Mind you, come to think of it, it's really, unfortunately, it's not that, or it appears that it's not too hard to miss the stopping point, because although the action points don't really matter, it seems that you have to stop your train in an incredibly precise spot in order to get that full 500 points. Although I'm still really confused as to why there is this action point system in TSW, because what does it really do to enhance gameplay, if anything? Especially since it's quite unforgiving. Especially when you especially when you go even 1 mile per hour over the speed limit, you end up losing points for something such a minor offence as that. And I've missed the stopping point, but who really cares? Anyway, these days Northern. I think it's Northern trains that run the stopping services along the Tees Valley line. So you would probably get possibly just sorry if I stumble up my words sometimes. That it's something that tends to happen with me more often than I care to count. More times than I care to count, rather. But yeah, as I was saying, I think these days if you were to go watching trains at stations along the Tees Valley line, you'd probably just get Northern 156s and 158s. That's the point. Do 158s actually run on the Tees Valley line in real life? Because I was briefly thinking there that it would just be 156s. And as we depart Dinsdale here, I've just noticed that very soon the speed limit appears to be going down to 30 miles an hour. And I remember that. I think around this part of the line, around between here and I think around where eventually Redcar British Steel Station was built, that there were major diversions to the rail alignment. Oh well, in this case, it's no wonder there's that 30 mile an hour speed restriction. I wouldn't want to be going through this lot at 60. But I think in Redcar British Steel's case, or the track around there, that had to be diverted to allow for the construction of the big steelworks. And in the case of the line, I think between here and Allens West, I don't know if the alignment through around this area was diverted, but I know that in 1971, British Rail opened Teesside Airport Station, which was meant to serve what is now, I think it's now called Durham Tees Valley Airport, but don't quote me on that. What I know is that a few years ago they were still doing flights to either Aberdeen in Scotland or Amsterdam in the Netherlands, which I find a bit funny. Why would, it just seems rather a bit odd to me that you could fly from Durham, well not Durham, but near Darlington to the Netherlands, because I would have thought you'd go to London or one of the other bigger cities to, I guess even Birmingham, to fly to another country. Speaking of which, I just remembered that Birmingham Airport, or the airport in Birmingham, is right next to the railway station called Birmingham International. But no, with Teesside Airport, it's a very strange affair, because with airport stations like, I guess, Heathrow Terminal 5, for example, normally those sorts of stations are incredibly busy with all the people going to and from the airport. But in the case of Teesside Airport Station, it was, I wouldn't even go so far as to say a perfect storm of incidents, and we're coming up on that station now. Go figure. So yeah, this station, from what I gather, it's about a mile from the. There's a train. I think I can hear it. There it is. Yeah, this station is about I think a mile from the terminal, and I can just see the control tower in the distance there. Let's see. Yeah, I think about there. Looks like the control tower. But no, it was only about. Well, yeah, it was a mile from the terminal itself, which already is a bit of a red flag, as far as I can tell. And initially there were bus connections between the station and the airport, but curiously, or at some point, but I don't know when, those bus services were withdrawn, and I dare say it would have been because of very low passenger numbers. And after that, your only option was to walk from the station to the airport terminal. That's what I think I remember. That's what Alex Dodds did many years ago when he made. I think basically it was a vlog where him and a bunch of his mates went to Teesside Airport back when. Well, because I think it was about 2014 where he made his trip down there from Chester Street, and yeah, I think originally when Teesside Airport opened, it got an hourly service, so obviously one train an hour in each direction. But I think by 2014, the situation had gotten so bad that the station was only being served by 2 train services a week, one in each direction, and only on a Sunday morning. In fact, I think both of those services were operated by the same train, which was doing a Darlington to Hartlepool and back service. And now, I think up until recently, the service had been whittled down to just 1 train a week. Because before that, it was you could get on the train at Teesside Airport, go to Hartlepool, and then get on the one coming back, go to Darlington. But then, I think up until recently, it was still that 2 trains a week service, but then it was whittled down to just 1. Would have been one of those parliamentary services, I think. And there's a flickering light in that signal box. Little details like that make a lot of difference to the immersion of these routes, I feel. From what I remember, you do see quite a lot of those flickering lights along this route. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the situation is with Teesside Airport nowadays, because as far as I know, the station platforms and all that other infrastructure is still there. But as far as I know, there aren't the service to that station is suspended. And I can't imagine it'll be brought back anytime soon, if that's all. Although, from what I understand, in the UK at least, it is cheaper and easier, especially from a legal perspective, to just run that bare minimum token or skeleton service, like once a day, or in Teesside Airport's case, once or twice a week. It's cheaper to do that than go through formal closure proceedings, from what I understand. Although saying that, with New Haven, the strange ghost station at New Haven Marine, that was, even though that got a weird parliamentary service for many years, I think it was only in 2020 when it was finally closed, officially. I'm surprised they actually did bother to close the station officially. And this is Allens West, a station that is indeed still open, as far as I know, and still has a regular service. I wonder how accurate these sounds are for the Class 101. That's one of the many things I always like about TSW, is that you're able to you're able to get out of your seat, or the driver's seat, and walk through the interior. I just realised I think this thing's got working interior lights, so I'll try to flick those on. Where would that light be? Oh, it's over here. That's right. No, train lights on. There we go. Next stop is Eaglescliffe, which is only 0.6 of a mile away. That's the other thing. This, obviously, the handbrake. I remember I once read a story of, would have been from the early days of these units, just back when trains still had, trains in England at least, still had these glass partitions between the driver's cab and the passenger saloon, so that passengers could see right out the front. And I remember there was this story where I think a kid and his dad were sat there in the seat right behind the cab, and the kid was going to his dad, why is the driver not using the steering wheel? I always get a chuckle out of that. Obviously the kid didn't realise that it wasn't a steering wheel, and it was just a handbrake. I was thinking this will be greens all the way to Middlesbrough. if any of you are watching, if anyone from like this part of England, like Darlington or Middlesbrough, is watching, feel free to comment below and let us know if the way Dovetail have rendered or depicted this area is actually accurate, especially if this really is how it would have all looked in 1989. Because I can't imagine the area around Eaglescliffe would have changed all that much. But I know that Darlington, of course, has since been electrified. And I think Eaglescliffe, from what I gather, is served by Northern Trains, as well as I think even Trans-Pennine Express stop here. Or it's either that they do, or they just sail on through without stopping. Then they take that route down through Yarm and join the East Coast Main Line just near Northallerton. That's one thing I remember about British Rail in the 1980s, even though obviously I wasn't alive at the time, is that a lot of the infrastructure was really run down, and a lot of the trains were getting very old and I guess clapped out. And yet I think in the early 80s at least, British Rail simply didn't have enough money to really get proper new trains, and I think that's how the Pacers came about, because they were just bus bodies that were very crudely modified and placed on old freight. I think they were placed on old freight wagon chassis and turned into diesel multiple units that way. And from what I remember, the Pacers were only meant to be in service for like 10 or 15 years somehow. But I think it was a combination of lack of money to get new. I think it was mainly due to the railway companies, and I guess especially after privatisation, simply not being able to bring in new trains that kept the Pacers in service for as long as they were. Right, so almost immediately after leaving Eaglescliffe here, we come up. Actually, I can't imagine these sidings here would still be in use anymore, at least in real life, but it doesn't look like they were ever used on this route for timetable mode services. So I think once we get closer to Thornaby, we'll see one of the really big freight yards that is almost prevalent on this route. Yeah, there it is. That's T's yard, I believe. And then further up the line, I think that's Lackenby Steelworks. And this absolutely massive array of sidings, that's around Redcar. Which reminds me of what I was saying earlier about Redcar British Steel, which was another curious station, because I think that would have been opened around the same sort of time as Teesside Airport, but don't quote me on that. What I do know is that Redcar British Steel was built pretty much solely to serve the employees, or the people who worked at the nearby steel mill. And I think from what I gather, the last part of that site closed in 2015, I believe. And since then, that left the station in a very awkward position, because of the whole thing with the parliamentary service and avoiding closure proceedings, even though the steelworks had closed and the entire area around the railway through that site was not actually public, it was actually private property, theoretically you could still catch a normal, if you were just an average Joe or like Jeff Marshall and exploring all the least used stations, you could still catch a regular service train to Redcar British Steel, but you could not actually walk off the platforms and onto the footpaths nearby, because you would then technically be trespassing. Because obviously presumably the railway station and obviously the track itself was owned by Network Rail. Yeah, I remember that Jeff Marshall himself did go to Redcar British Steel as part of his least used station series, and I won't spoil what happens in the video, of course, and if I remember I will. If I remember to do so, I'll put a link to it in the top right corner. Either that or the video I made from TSW that showed, well, that was just train spotting at Redcar British Steel. in the late 80s. But from what I understand, since Jeff did his video on that station, the service has been suspended, but I don't know what... I can't imagine the station is still... I know that the service at Redcar British Steel, I believe, has actually been suspended, but as far as I know, the station, officially at least, is still open. And I don't know what's going to happen to the future of that station, because it's in the middle of nowhere, really, and was only built to serve industrial workers, basically. And although we won't see it in this video, it is, at least, even as this route shows, even back in the 80s, it was still a very, very basic affair. Dare say you would have had to buy tickets on the train, because it certainly didn't look like there were any ticket machines. Actually, come to think of it, were ticket machines even a thing in the 1980s, or did they come along more recently? Because I know that there's certainly a very common thing these days, especially on the commuter rail network in Auckland. Although saying that, I just remembered, you have these ticket machines at the stations in Auckland, where you can either top up, use like basically a smart card that they call AT Hop, where you save a little bit on the train, bus, and ferry fares, but obviously you can also get the conventional paper tickets. And then I just remembered, I think in Wellington they don't, from memory, they don't actually have ticket machines on the stations. And in those instances, in Wellington at least, if you don't already have like a day rover ticket, you can, well, your only option then would be to buy your ticket on the train. Because that's one of the major differences between the suburban rail networks in Auckland and Wellington, is that in Auckland that they don't sell tickets on the trains anymore, and yet they do in Wellington. Oh, this is Thornaby, which looks to me like this seems like this is obviously an incredibly wide platform, and I'm wondering if it was, because this obviously looks like space for a car park, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure why. Besides the car park, I'm not really sure why the platform here is so wide. No, this is our last intermediate stop before Middlesbrough. And between here and that aforementioned station, we'll go past T's Yard. As far as I know, that yard is still active today, but I don't know how busy. Excuse me. As far as I know, T's Yard is still active today, but I don't know I don't know how many trains go in and out of that yard each day. That's one of the good things about more modern DMUs like the Class 150, is that you don't have to go through this hassle of having to cut the power every time you need to, essentially having to cut the power every time you need to go faster, and then reapplying power. Thus, actually, come to think of it, I've just remembered the Class 172, which is a fairly modern DMU that I think they've been around for like 10 years, and they currently serve with Chiltern. I think Chiltern Railways, or at least Chiltern Railways did use 4 of them, and then initially it was London Overground, Chiltern Railways, and London Midland. But London Midland got rebranded either into there's like West Midlands Trains or West Midlands Railway, and the London Overground got rid of their 172s. I think in 2019, and they were transferred to the West Midlands after the Class 710 Aventras arrived. But no, the reason why I bring up the 172s in the first place is that despite being units built in the 21st century, they are actually diesel mechanicals, and yet, although they have mechanical... No, they're diesel mechanical, but they have automatic transmission. And one of the other things I remember about the Class 172s is that when you hear them accelerating away from the station, the sound they make is rather unique, especially for modern trains, because you can quite clearly hear the engine revving down as it changes gear and then revving back up. And as fascinating as that is, I honestly have no idea why the 172s are diesel mechanical, especially since most diesel units these days, especially in the UK, are either diesel hydraulic or diesel electric. Although I think diesel hydraulic is by far the most common. Pretty sure with diesel electrics, at least in some of those cases, I think you can actually hear the traction motors as well as the diesel engines themselves. I remember that I think with the Class 180s, they're diesel hydraulics, and then you have like the cross-country Voyagers, or something like the 220s and 221s, which are diesel electric. And as far as I know, the 180s and Voyagers have the same power units, but because of their different transmissions, they do still sound different. As for the speaking of the 101s, I'm not entirely sure how accurate these sounds are. Hello, there's a Trainspotter bridge. It's like what they have in Newport, South Wales. That reminds me, there was a gaming YouTuber I used to watch, I think it was called Frantic, who was from Middlesbrough. And I remember he made one of the rare non-gaming videos he made was about this Trainspotter bridge. At least I think that's what it is. If it's not, then I've just made an absolute fool of myself. I lost interest in Frantic after I realised that he wasn't really uploading any railway gaming videos anymore. Well, even so, I do still wish him good luck for the future of his channel. Of course, I think that they probably wouldn't have come to mind if I wasn't driving into Middlesbrough today. I think it's like an hour, it's just over, I'm pretty sure it's just over an hour to go from Darlington all the way to Saltburn with one of these Class 101s. Although in my case it would probably take a lot longer, because I often end up, I find that every time I drive a 101 I end up running late, and today I guess there's no exception. So I can tell that we're pretty much running about 3 minutes late at this point, but I'm not too concerned about that. As far as I reckon that I think that I try not to get too hung up on punctuality in this game. I usually just play it for the enjoyment of driving trains, especially since you can't drive the real things unless you go through a very long series of qualifications and training. Although I think you don't need much training to drive miniature engines, but then again they're obviously not full size and consequently a very different beast. Right, now we're approaching Middlesbrough, which in today's case at least is our final destination. In real life I'm pretty sure that Northern and TPE serve this station. I'm pretty sure some Northern services off of Middlesbrough go to Whitby, where they meet the North Yorkshire Moors Railway at Gromont. And I'm pretty sure the Trans-Pennine Express service to the station actually continues on towards Redcar Central. I think even more recently, I'm pretty sure even London North Eastern Railway started running at least one daily direct service from Middlesbrough to London. No doubt using the Class 800 units, I imagine. Which I think I'm pretty sure the 800s would run in diesel mode as far as like Northallerton or Thirsk, and then switch to electric mode for the rest of their journey to London. Because it's the 800s that are electric diesels, but the 801s are electric only. Well, that was 4 minutes late. Wonderful. Now, well, that has been a quick run from Darlington to Middlesbrough with the Class 101. I do hope that you've enjoyed it, and yeah, I thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Of course, I've got a silver medal. That's that's bloody nice. Yeah, I think I'll just leave you with this shot of a Class 101 as it... I was just about to leave again. But yeah, as I say, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you check out some of my other TSW videos, and thank you Mr. Man for ruining my shot, and I will see you next time.